Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Friday, October 31st, 2025, Halloween, our crazy holiday here in the West. But for us, it is the end of the day, the end of the week, our favorite time, and our favorite get together with my dear friends and longtime collaborators, Ray McGovern and Larry Johnson, the Intelligence Community Roundtable. Gentlemen, welcome here. Double duty for both of you this week. You're always so kind as to do that, and I am deeply appreciative. Larry, let me ask you first, why would the president, I'm going to ask, it's going to sound like I think you're a shrink. Why would the president have announced publicly we're going to be testing nuclear weapons? What is to be gained by that? Why would a country with a sophisticated arsenal like ours need to test them?
It's insecurity. You know, it reminds me back in 1980, 81, when I was teaching at the American University, and I took a group of students down to the Soviet embassy at the time. And it was a time when the United States was starting to put Pershing 2 missiles into Europe. And at the time, the Soviets were not actually at the most modern peak of their capabilities. And we got into the discussion of the Pershing 2 and the reaction of the Soviet, I think it was with a political counselor. And it was like, well, we got that too. I mean, it was very defensive. It was like, yeah, you got something. That's us too. That's Donald Trump. He didn't even know what he was saying. Because number one, he's reacting to the fact that Russia has deployed a vehicle capable of carrying a nuclear warhead, but it's not carrying a nuclear warhead. They haven't tested a new nuclear warhead. Not since 1992, I believe, is the last time they did one. Or maybe it was 1990. I think it was 1990. U.S. was 1992. And then to go out and not understand that it's going to take 36 months if they're going to do such a test to get it in place. So again, this is insecurity. Trump, one of the characteristics of this narcissist is he is terribly insecure. You know, remember his whole deal with little Marco? Hey, see, my hands are not small. This is right. My hands are not small moment.
But this stuff is dangerous. Chris, put up the full screen of the president's tweet. I want to read it and ask Ray to respond to it. This is what he said earlier today. The United States has more nuclear weapons than any other country. McGregor says that's not true. This was accomplished including a complete update and renovation of existing weapons during my first term in office. Because of the tremendous destructive power, I hated in caps, to do it, but had no choice. Russia is second and China is a distant third, but will be even within 5 years because of other countries' testing programs. I have instructed the Department of War to start testing our nuclear weapons on an equal basis. That process will begin immediately. Thank you for your attention to this matter, President Donald J. Trump. Ray McGovern, what other countries are testing nuclear weapons?
Well, North Korea did one about a decade ago, but no one else is doing nuclear explosions. Now, I'm not at all sure that Trump was thinking about testing in the traditional sense, underground tests or over-the-ground tests. What he was talking about, I think what Larry is saying is quite right. The Budavyesnik and the Oreshnik, and my God, the Poseidon, have been advertised now by none less than Putin himself. And the reaction, the adolescent or puerile reactions, oh, we got them too, and we're gonna test our own. Well, the Russian test was the test of the missile in flight, the one for the Budyashnik, and it proved to be successful. And most wondrous of all, it was powered by nuclear power. Okay, that's the first. Okay, that's one of the things that Putin has been warning about. Look, you have to realize we're not going to just sort of build ABMs and waste all our money like you guys are. We're going to find ways around, and this Budavyesnik is the cat's pajamas, so to speak. The other one, the Poseidon, also is a real threat. So there's a new nuclear balance here, that doesn't depend on anti-ballistic missile systems. It can't, because no system, no anti-air defense, no anti-missile defense can cope with these, some of them hypersonic missiles, others cruise missiles that can fly forever almost, and almost forever in distance as well.
Larry,
Judge,
Larry,
just on that last point to follow
sure.
up, that what this is a game changer in terms of what Russia has done, because in the past, when is in all the agreements that Ray was involved with, the negotiations, whether intermediate nuclear forces or START, you always assumed this particular missile can travel so far, and so that's why we had intermediate range and intercontinental. This thing doesn't have any distance limits, because the previous systems, you had fuel, and when that fuel ran out, that rocket didn't go anywhere. Not with this. This is like the Energizer Bunny, nuclearized.
Yeah, actually, if I could insert myself here, it was the ABM treaty that I was first involved with. That shows how old I am. I was chief of the Soviet foreign policy branch in 1972. And I was in Moscow when that was concluded. And maybe people need to know this, but it was really very simple, okay? There had to be a way to restrain expenditures up the kazoo, okay? So the Russians were persuaded, and so were we, that if we limited the number of anti-ballistic missile systems to 2, eventually to 1, neither side could ever think that they could do a major first strike without suffering incredible retaliation in return. It worked for 30 years. It worked. It was the balance of terror, but it was a balance.
So
and John Bolton persuaded George W. Bush, oh, we don't need that anymore. So they got out of it. The next one, the INF Treaty, the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, which Scott Ritter, our friend, was the first on the ground to monitor for 2.5 years in this god-awful place called, I forget, no. Anyhow, he was there in Siberia doing this, and what that did was destroy a whole class, as Larry mentioned, a whole class of intermediate and smaller range ballistic missiles. That was in 1987. That lasted until Trump got out of it in 2019. So that lasted, 3 years longer than the 30 years that the AB. So now we have a system where the Russians have been bragging about, look, we're going to play your game. Putin himself on 3 occasions has said, look, we're going to do something really interesting. And I have more to say on that, but let me give the floor back.
All right. So I apologize. We just had a power loss here, and my backup system has kicked in. McGregor says we have 4,800 nuclear warheads, and the Russians have 3,800. Ritter says it only takes one to end life as we know it. Are we about, Larry Johnson, to get into another nuclear arms race?
The Russians have already won it. We've got a number of weapons, but my understanding is the Minutemen ICBMs, they're almost as old as me, so they're 60 years old, 55 plus, and they've run the numbers to sort of modernize them, so they've got some realistic chance that if they had to hit the button to make them fire, that they'd actually launch. I think it just completely decimates the Air Force budget. So in theory, yes, there will be this new nuclear arms race, but in reality, Russia's already won it. They're ahead on the hypersonic missiles. They're ahead with nuclear powered missiles. They're ahead now with these other 2 new technologies, the Burevestnik and the Poseidon. And the United States, we don't have an answer in any of those categories. We still look at Russia's got 5 different types of hypersonic missiles that have been deployed and operational in theater. The United States doesn't even have one. Not one. And the time in which it might be able to deploy more than one is at least a year away.
Wow. Is the Trump administration, Ray McGovern, about to lie us into an invasion of Venezuela?
I hope not, but I think so. The signs are all there. What I trace it to is a kind of adolescent reaction to what happened in Beijing on victory over Japan. So stark was the shift in power from west to east, with all those leaders there representing most of the world's population, that Trump came back and said, I got to do something. What can I do? And Hegseth said, well, let's concentrate it where we can work our will. How about Venezuela? I almost said Grenada, because there's a parallel there with what we did with Grenada after we lost 241 Marines in Beirut, but we won't go there. So Texas is going to do this. So Trump said, oh, that sounds like a good idea. And so we can shift our focus to our own hemisphere, where might rigs right in spades, and in our own country. My God. You pointed out, Judge, some of the civil liberties implications and some of the constitutional violations that exist now by turning to our own country. Hegseth is he may have a Dick Tracy kind of profile, but he's really not conversant with what's really going on in the rest of the world. One thing I would add is that, I read comments under our sessions here, and there was one comment tying the Budovyesnik and Oryeshnik and Poseidon to Ukraine. And the question was, why did the Russians wait so long after all these betrayals, Minsk and all that? Why did they wait so long to do the special military operation? And the answer was, they weren't ready. They were waiting for Oryeshnik and Budovyesnik and Poseidon. Now they're ready. They couldn't get the West to take them seriously. There are numerous examples of this. Finally, at the State of the Union address on the 1st of March 2018, Putin did a show and tell with six videos of these new weapons, and he said they'll be coming on pretty soon. Well, now they're online. Okay, so you have this. And then he said, now will you listen? Well, no, they didn't listen. Instead of they're building F-35s and Golden Dome that they're building? The Golden Dome be a waste of money. Luckily, I don't think the Russians have any idea of attacking the United States. They could with some of these weapons, but they're a deterrent. Finally, we have not the ABM treaty or the INF treaty. We have a deterrent in form of Budovyesnik, Oryeshnik, and Poseidon.
Larry, do we know if the Russians are supplying the Venezuelans with anti-aircraft and other military gear, including technicians to operate them?
No, there have been reports to that. I do know that they have Chinese air defense systems that are comparable to the S-300. But we have seen both Chinese and Russian military aircraft that have landed in Venezuela. And what was specifically offloaded, I haven't seen any public reports on it, and I don't have access to the classified information. I don't see Russia necessarily getting to the point that it wants to get into a direct conflict with the United States and Venezuela. But they still can take actions along with the Chinese and along with Iran that'll make life very difficult for U.S. forces if they decide to launch an attack. Now, again, the reports are Trump saying they're going to launch air attacks on Venezuela next week. I mean, the dumbest thing I've ever heard, where you go out, announce in advance exactly where you're going to strike, because Venezuela is quite capable of making preparations to try to defend itself.
What military target are they going to strike? What is their legitimate military goal, Ray McGovern? They can't answer that.
There's no military threat. just as in other cases, it's a matter of flexing our muscles where we can, getting rid of a person who they all hate, who they actually tried to assassinate when he was making a speech in an open air theater, came really close to doing him in. Okay. Then they had people like the CIA going in there. Well, it's going to come to a no good end, to borrow a Chinese expression, because Vietnam will look like a child's play, because the Venezuelans and others who feel strongly about the Yankees are going to come in there, because you can't win this kind of war with air power. You have to put the Marines in there. The Marines are going to get a bloody nose, in my view.
Larry,
Yeah.
was the CIA ever involved in facilitating the movement of drugs in Latin America, or looking the other way while the drugs were making their way into the U.S.?
They weren't facilitating it. My partner, Bob Nieves, he's, now retired partner. Gary Webb wrote extensively about Bobby and his battles with the CIA in Costa Rica. Now, I know that actually Bobby had a good relationship with Joe Fernandez, who was the chief of station. And the CIA, the drugs were flowing, the Contra movement. You had the north part that was in Honduras, then the southern part that was down in Costa Rica. And it was that Costa Rica part that those guys were moving narcotics, and the CIA was aware of it, but was not, they weren't controlling it, they weren't directing it, because their priority was, we got to beat the Sandinistas. And if these guys wanted to make some money on the side, so be it. So you can call it negligence on the part of the CIA for allowing that to happen. But there were several occasions where that I know of personally from, I was the senior Central American analyst at that time during that period. And, the CIA, we had an arrogance on the part of our case officers. And, Jack Devine, I saw a little bit of your interview with him. There was Jack Devine, Terry Ward, and then another CIA guy. And Vince Shields. They were rotating between who would be chief of base, who would be chief of station, who would be head of the Latin American division back at headquarters. And, it was a cycle. So they were all about serving the president to defeat the Sandinistas. And if there was the drug trafficking going on, well, it really wasn't their bailiwick. However, I think my partner's Bobby Nieves, his attempts to try to stop it and to get it prosecuted, the CIA did interfere with that. So,
all right. Well, here's for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, for seriousness or for laughs. Here's Jack at his best or at his worst on all this. Chris, Jack number one. Didn't the CIA itself once facilitate the movement of drugs into the United States for some CIA designated better purpose?
Let me not equivocate. That is absolutely 100% nonsense. The CIA never, ever transported drugs into the United States or had anything to do with it. I spent all my career beating a living
but the CIA then looked the other way while this happened, so that the kingpins behind the delivery of the drugs would cooperate with the CIA. We all know that, Jack.
Do we? I have no supporting evidence, and I would like to see your team supporting evidence. We don't work with drug traffickers. Who told me this nonsense?
Is Devine credible, Ray McGovern?
No. Operators lie. So in that sense, you expect lies. Now, look, this one's easy. All right. Look, the CIA controlled the Contras. The Contras couldn't get funded by the Congress. They needed money. One way to get money was to sell crack cocaine in LA and Sacramento and elsewhere in California. Don't believe Ray McGovern, believe CIA Director John Deutsch, who in 1996 or so confessed, that was we were doing that stuff. So, it's pretty simple. You could get people saying, well, it was just the Contras. The Contras were in control of the CIA. And, please just remember, look it up. John Deutsch, crack cocaine in LA. And you'll see that, yeah, they do. They needed the money. Congress wasn't giving any money. So this one's easy. Let's not expect truth from Jack, especially on operational matters. He's entitled to lie. That's what they do.
Larry.
Well,
Just the way you said it so matter of factly, right? He's entitled to lie. That's what they do.
well, I was a lot closer to this because I worked also on the Central American Task Force under Alan Fires. We pretended we had control over the Contras, but the Contras had a tendency. They did a lot of things on their own, and we failed to control it. But there was the knowledge, and this is where you get Jack Devine was doing a lawyer's trick there. We didn't transport it. Yeah, that's true. It wasn't transported by CIA, but the CIA knew how the transportation was taking place. I mean, one of the big players on the Contra side was this fella Eden Pastora, and then there was an American, I think if I recall, his name was John Hull, that was down there. So yeah. But remember, this was also during the time of Ollie North's activities,
right?
Raise money by selling weapons to Iran during the whole Iran Contra scandal as well. So I mean, it was a messy time. But Jack to pretend that we don't deal with drug traffickers, yeah, just like we don't deal with terrorists. Oh, Al-Jilani, okay, we'll forget him and all the different terrorists we trained in Afghanistan that wound up being involved with the second Chechen war in Russia.
Right.
So yeah, it's not credible.
Judge, there's a media aspect to this,
please.
And it's a terrible chapter. Gary Webb, who was mentioned before, researched this, did a terrific job. Bob Perry, my mentor in journalism, pursued this very, very aggressively. Gary Webb found the truth, and the rest of the media, especially the New York Times, dumped on him, ostracized him. He couldn't get a job, so he finally committed suicide. That's how bad they were to a fellow who revealed those secrets before John Deutsch said, by the way, yeah, it was us. So this is a really sad chapter in the history of mainstream media. They did a job on Gary Webb to the point where he committed suicide.
Yeah, and Washington Post piled on as well. I mean,
last subject matter. Does Marco Rubio want peace in Ukraine, or does he want the war to continue?
He would. I would think he would like to get it ended on U.S. terms, but this is the problem. I posted yesterday because there's a recent article in the Wall Street Journal, and it was also in the Washington Post that revealed that in March of this year, there was a dissent in the PDB with INR. Now, and I'll leave it to Ray to comment on how common dissents were. Just I know in my experience writing for the PDB,
what's PDB? Explain
the Presidential Daily Brief. So the document that's put together to take down to the president and say, here's the latest intelligence. And I know that when I wrote a piece for the PDB, I had to coordinate it with State Department's Bureau of Intelligence and Research, with the Defense Intelligence Agency, and if I was using any material from NSA, with the National Security Agency. And they would sometimes say, hey, we disagree with this point. And I'd have to make a decision with my branch chief of how far to fight it and push it. I don't think they ever had to publish a dissent with the analysis I did. In March of this year, the CIA was saying, oh, yeah, you got all this room. Just pressure, put on more sanctions, give more weapons. You're going to force the Russians to change. And the INR analyst said, nope, ain't going to happen. And they put a dissent into the PDB. And shortly, a couple of weeks after that, the head of INR had a talk with the analyst to tell him the White House was not pleased. Donald Trump was, quote, irked that he was being given this kind of intelligence. And reportedly, the two analysts were fired. So,
Wow.
I felt deja vu all over again, but I'll leave it to Ray to comment on how common is it to get a dissent in the PDB?
Well, it should be more common than it had been. I think it's more common now. But I don't really trust the Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post or the Times to have the particulars right on this. There's so much internecine fighting that by the time the Post and the Wall Street Journal catch up with this story, I'm very suspicious that it's distorted. Remember, Marco Rubio is running not only the State Department, but the national security apparatus. He's the national security advisor as well. So I don't know how much truth to put behind this story. And I'm just going to say that's I have to see what happens.
Understood. But remember, Marco Rubio is running something else, a campaign for president to succeed Donald Trump.
Yeah. Well, and then, but I just, again, on the timing, since they're now reporting on something that happened in March, which in retrospect, Rubio still had not become the national security advisor by that point. But he was in the process of that. So, I found at least some shred of hope, at least there was one moment perhaps when there was a dissent, insisting that, the Russians weren't going to negotiate on this. They had a firm position that Putin laid out in 2024. Well, what caught my eye was the willingness of the CIA to basically give bad information to the president.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. Thanks for the double duty. Thanks for coming on late in the day on Friday. Very much appreciated. Have a great weekend. We'll see you both on Monday morning.
Yes, sir.
Trick or treat.
Thank you. Trick or treat. Right. You guys don't want to see how Chris is dressed.
Oh, he looks fine. He looks fine.
Yes, he does. Yes,
Scary.
he does. So on Monday, as usual, Alistair Crook, Ray McGovern, Larry Johnson, and Professor Francisco Rodriguez from Venezuela. Are they the monsters Donald Trump says they are? And maybe one or two others before Monday is out. Thank you for watching. Have a great weekend. Judge Napolitano for Judging Freedom.